Hello friends, today's topic of discussion is developments in cinema and OTT. In the earlier discussion in the framework of the developments in cinema and OTT, we talked about the various phases of the Indian film industry, where we talked about the silent cinema, the arrival of the talkies, then we also talked about the post-independent cinema, where we talked about the idea of nation building. And over a period of time in 1970s, we also talked about the kind of changes which came in the film industry, where the themes regarding the anti-establishment cinema, they were also being talked about. Then we also talked about the changes which came in 1990s with regard to the funding of the films, with regard to the kind of technology which was available to us in 1990s with the arrival of globalization, liberalization and privatization, and how these kinds of changes, they definitely played an important role in terms of filmmaking as well. And we also find that some kind of corporatization of the film industry also took place during this time. And we also see where we earlier we were able to release films in a very limited number of prints, but now with the arrival of so much money, with the arrival of foreign companies, we find that a number of Indian films, they were released simultaneously in foreign countries as well, with large number of prints. And the kind of changes which were happening in 1990s, they brought about changes in the 21st century as well. And especially when we see that the kind of changes which came during the COVID-19, where we find that OTT also became popular. It was existing before that as well, but we find that during the COVID-19 its popularity soared in that sense, because many of the theatres and cinemas, they were closed. The film festivals were cancelled or postponed, and many of the films, they got delayed as well. So because of which we find that many of the filmmakers, they release their films on the OTT, and how public it also subscribed OTT during this particular period, and so many platforms they became popular during this time. And we find that how during this particular period a number of shootings, they got halted, because people, they were not available, they had this kind of a fear of COVID. And a number of organizations like CINTA, they appealed to the Hindi film actors to make donations and help the daily wage workers, and many people from the film industry, they also donated money so as to support the people, those who are associated with the film industry. We also find that it was also a period when the global box office dropped by billions of dollars, and how the streaming increased during this particular point of time. And we find that many of the blockbusters which were to be released since mid March 2020 have been postponed, or they got postponed or cancelled around the world. And one such case could be seen was a very popular film, which was 83, which was based on the India's victory of 1983 World Cup, when they defeated West Indies. And the budget of the film was also huge, 240 crores plus 20 crores for the publicity and advertising. And there were a lot of interest costs on the budget. And we find that film was not all that successful, that it was able to recover only 180 crores from all the revenue sources, and it gave some kind of a loss of 80 crores to this particular film. But we have to also realize that the film got delayed because of the COVID-19, and how when you talk about films in India, and how this particular film was based on that famous 1983 victory. And cinema and cricket, both of them, they are so popular in India, and when both of them, they were being merged in this particular film, as the case was a film called Lagan, which again was dealing with the cricket as well. So we find that this particular film, and it was a good film in that sense, very well made, but it also made some kind of losses as well. We also find that during this particular period, one of the films which was a feature film earlier, but how this particular film became very popular during this particular time, Steven Soderbergh's Contagion, which was made in 2011, and how this film was prophetic in its depiction of a similar crisis that world faced during the COVID-19. And we find that Steven Soderbergh sought the insight of top epidemiologists to describe just how a pandemic starts, operates, and finally ends. So they described that it probably starts scenario as a wet market somewhere in Asia, transferring a coronavirus to a human host. And so this particular film basically was one of the most sought films, and how it was being seen by so many people during the times of pandemic, because it was trying to replicate the kind of reality which was there during this particular time. So how also reality now in a way wanted to see that kind of a fiction which had been made earlier, and how it was trying to borrow from that fiction. So these kinds of things, they were also in a way happening, and we also see that many of the film associations and how these film bodies, they were playing an important role during this particular period in terms of supporting each other. And we also find that how when the state governments, they closed the cinema halls during this time, and then many of the staff members, those who were associated with the film industry, they were in a way being denied the kind of food which they had to in a way. But we also see that the governments, they were making other kinds of arrangements. The film industry people, they were also in a way, the film industry people, those who were there in the various bodies, FWIC or CINTA and other bodies, film related bodies like IMPA, they were also making some kind of concerted efforts in that sense, so as to salvage the situation. And when one talks about the concerns which became very important with the coming of the OTT, with regard to that how in a way how the women, they are being portrayed in the films, and how we have seen that largely the Indian cinema had been more male dominated and male centric. So OTT brought about this kind of a change in that sense, that many female characters, kind of OTT platform provide them that kind of an opportunity where female oriented roles, they were being written, and how many women characters, they were the dominant characters in these kinds of series. And we find that how in the earlier films, where heroines, they were considered secondary to the hero, that kind of a change could be seen in many of the films which are made in the later times. And when you see that how women characters, they are being shown in that sense that they do not have any independent existence, and how the film is in a way explored in relation to the male character only. And when women, they are being portrayed, then they are portrayed in some kind of a way where they only have to provide glamour, some kind of a relief, respite and entertainment. And when you talk about the kind of feature films which have been made in the later times, and how these films they are dealing with issues of women, and some of them can be Gangubai Kathiawadi in 2022, Dhakad in 2020, Shabash Mithu in 2022, Thappad in 2020, Panga in 2021, Chapak in 2020, Paglet in 2021, and English Winglish in 2013. So these are only some of the films. There are so many others which have also been made with regard to the concerns of women, where women protagonists, they have been shown in a comparatively more determined or more resolute kind of roles. And we also find that many of them, others, various kinds of web series which have been made for the OTT platform. And when you talk about these kinds of films, then we in a way try to, they all of them, they in a way try to communicate the kind of determination of the female characters, whether they want to learn English or for that matter, or whether they want to pursue some kind of a career, or the issue is concerning their self-respect, as the case was in the context of Thappad wars, or polishing their skills or to pursue a career, as was the case in Shabash Mithu. And so we find that all these kind of portrayals definitely play an important role in terms of providing not only relief and entertainment to the masses, but at the same time the audience as well, the audience which is seeing or watching this kind of a cinema, then they also get inspired or motivated to pursue what they want to achieve in their lives. So, in that sense, when you talk about OTT, then it is definitely an inclusive medium, and how the freedom and the transparency which it offers is also very remarkable. And we also find that in OTT platform, the urban empowerment of women is also being reflected in so many web series which have been made for the women characters. And we also find that a number of women, the large number of women now, they have entered filmmaking business in some kind of diverse work which they are doing, which they were not doing earlier. They were only limited maybe women directors or maybe women music directors. But on the sets also we find that there are more women, they are involved in terms of making of films. So many women script writers, they have entered the film industry, and a number of women directors and producers, they are also there with regard to bringing about that kind of a change, which is very important, which is very refreshing in that sense. And we also find that the kind of viewpoint which they have, and this kind of a viewpoint which is diverse in nature, which is very refreshing, could also be seen. So we find that from that point of view, OTT has brought about that kind of a change, where the kind of content which was being shown earlier could be in a way recast in a different manner. And we also see that how when women, they are being shown as the leading roles in these kinds of series, they are not the family dramas or usual saas bahu range, rather they are the characters which are more substantial in nature. And how various production houses or various OTT platforms, they are also providing women writers this kind of an opportunity, where they can explore this kind of a medium. And Aranyak of Ravina Tandon and Ye Kali Kali Aankhein of Achal Singh, Fame Game of Madhuri Dixit and Maharani of Huma Qureshi are some of the series which are quite popular. And how all of them, they have also been able to leave some kind of a mark in that sense. And the filmmakers like Alankita Srivastav and Kanika Dhillon, all of them, they are also making the kind of films which in a way are bringing about or talking about that kind of a change which is desirable in the society. We also see that especially during the COVID, we find that a number of serials which were made in the earlier period like Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc., Vyomkesh Bakshi, all of them, they were re-aired on Doordarshan, and how the Doordarshan viewership also got increased during this time, 650% growth in the viewership in 1 week. And we find that such kind of changes could also be seen in the 2020, where the serial of the yesteryears, they were being re-shown to the audience, and audience was receptive in terms of re-seeing them as well. And one of the important issues or the concerns which is there with regard to any medium for that matter, especially the audiovisual one. And cinema, when you talk about the issue of censorship, and there is a lot of debate with regard to the necessity of censorship, that how some kind of a balance has to be created between the artistic freedom and the censorship. And there are people, those who are the supporters of censorship, they would claim that too much freedom is not required, and if there will be no censorship, then it would result in display of content which is inappropriate for the children, or some kind of harmful impact on society may also be there. And there are others, those who reject this kind of an idea. They have their own ideas. They say that there should not be any kind of restrictions, there should not be any kind of censorship, because the censorship may in a way lead to restriction on the freedom of expression, and it may in a way also narrow the boundaries of creativity, that the creative people, they should be let loose, they should have this kind of a creative freedom to in a way decide for themselves that what they want to make and what they want to show to the society. And but when you talk about the society, because there are certain social norms, values and ideas which are there in society, and the people, those who argue that there has to be some kind of a limit to what one is showing or making, in that sense, has to be there. And we also see that it is not only the question of platform where such kind of content is available, but we also see that how technology has also progressed over a period of time, and the internet is available on the mobile, and so many social networking sites are there, hidden cameras, video clips and TikTok, all of them, they are there. So when you talk about these kinds of ideas, then we find that one is quite vulnerable as well. So some kind of a restriction in a way should be there, so that we are able to in a way balance both the urges, whether the issue of the artistic expression, which is in the framework of the freedom which one should have, and at the same time some kind of a censorship as well, where we find that it in a way deals with the concerns of the society. And when one is talking about the issue of censorship, then one talks about the kind of pros and cons which are associated with it, that how when you talk about censorship, it reduces the hate speech in the society, and how children can be protected from consuming the harmful content, and how it also provides an additional or added layer of security to country's global image. On the other hand, it is also being criticized that how it is some kind of a check on the freedom of expression, and it is also a check on the artistic liberty. So we have to in a way balance both these kinds of aspects, that we have to see that society is not being harmed when there is no censorship, and even if censorship is there, then also we have to create that kind of a balance, that society is not harmed and the freedom of expression of the individuals is well taken care of. So these are some of the concerns which are there in that context. And with regard to OTT, it is generally being talked about that how OTT does not have any kind of a censorship, and they are only in a way have to self classify the content with regard to the age classification, and they have to be comparatively more concerned with regard to their content. They have to see that the kind of content which they are making. And we find that many times films which are first released on the OTT and then they are broadcast on television will need to be in compliance with the Cable Television Network Regulation Act 1995 and Cable Television Network Rules 1994. So even if a film is being released on OTT first and then it is coming to the television, then it has to comply with the rules which have been framed earlier with regard to the cable television, and so it just cannot be broadcast directly without any kind of permission from these kinds of bodies which are there. And it is also not mandatory to produce the CBFC certification for any film content directly or first released on OTT platforms. So, we find that, so this kind of a debate which is there with regard to whether OTT has, or it needs to have some kind of a censorship. So, we find that OTT platforms, any content which is there on the OTT platforms, it should not in any way contravene the Article 19(2) of the Constitution, 2 of the Constitution, government under Section 69A of Information Technology Act and IT Blocking Rules 2009. So, in that sense, they have the power to issue directions for blocking the public access of any information through any computer resource, and has the power to remove such objectionable content as well. So, we find that some kind of rules in that sense they are available, and the government also has this kind of a right, that how one has to in a way regulate that kind of a content as well. And we also have seen that how courts they have interpreted the application of Article 19(2) of the Constitution vis-a-vis the censorship to include the restraints on such content that is against the sovereignty, integrity and the security of India, or is defamatory, in contempt of court, or leads to incitement of any offence. So, this also is very important, that how such kind of interpretations they have been made, and how these kinds of interpretations they could also be in a way, if needed, applied in that sense. And we find that government has also made some kind of an effort in this regard, and the enactment of the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code Rules 2021 guidelines, they provide for a 3-tier grievance redressal mechanism as well, where at the first level we talk about the self-regulation, level 2 talks about in a way it adds in a way self-regulation via an independent self-regulating body, and level 3 talks about an interministerial committee supervision system. And we find that such kind of things they have been talked about, and how the filmmakers they have to in a way devise for themselves, that how the kind of content which they want to make for the audience. And we find that during the COVID and thereafter, the OTT memberships they surged, and because these OTT platforms are providing a lot of entertainment options for the people, and the range of the program and the content of the program was comparatively more wide. And now we have also witnessed many of the houses they are not having these TV networks, rather they have the OTT platforms. They are watching content only on the OTT platforms, they are not watching on them and watching them on the television. And we find that so many films and TV series they are exclusively made for these kinds of platform. And we also find that the subscriptions are not very expensive, and flexible subscriptions fees are there. And so because of which these kinds of contents they are becoming popular. And we also find that apart from the paid content which is there on these OTT platforms, some of the companies at different points of time they also offer free content as well. And I remember Z5 came up with an initiative, Be Calm, Be Entertained, and they provided the premium content accessible to consumers for free at one point of time. And at the same time, all these platforms and digital media they are also expanding the customer base, locations and demographies as well. And when you talk about these kinds of platforms, then we see that how because of the arrival of these kinds of platforms, because of the kind of content, Indian content which is available on these platforms, and the Indian stories could be seen at a global level. And writers, those who tell stories from a unique point of view, they also get that kind of recognition which they deserve, and how the audience worldwide can also access this kind of content, and how writers they have this kind of an opportunity to exhibit what they have written. And so in this way, people they also in a way can relate to the content which has been written in other countries, and how some kind of it also helps in bridging the cultures, because when people watch such kind of a content, that how nowadays we see a phenomena of Korean dramas which are being viewed by the Indian masses, especially young children, and we find that how it has become so popular in India. And so one comes to know about the culture of that particular region as well. And we also see that audience is also receptive to the stories that focus on women on these kinds of platform. But one of the negative aspects is also see that how a lot of screen time is being used by people, and it is also affecting them in a very negative, and emotional and physical health is also being disturbed when people are constantly watching the OTT platforms, and it is also causing a lot of stress to them. And from physical point of view, from the health point of view, the idea the concerns relating to obesity, sleep disorders, and addiction to these platforms, binge watching is also happening. So these are some of the concerns which are there. So there is some kind of a need of some kind of a gatekeeping, that some kind of locks and measures for these OTT platforms need to be there, especially for the children, those who get easily attracted, and those who are in a way hooked to this kind of a content which is there. And we see that so many platforms, they are also in a way trying to keep up with the kind of demand of the consumers. They are also in a way upgrading the infrastructure, so that they are able to in a way match the expectations of the masses. And in that we find that smartphones have definitely played an important role in that sense, and how people they are watching this content on their smartphones as well. And the availability of the material in multiple languages also helps, where we find that the quality is also high definition, and the content is also available in multiple languages. So with this, I'd like to end the discussion. Thank you very much.